So we'll create a new file. I'll create a new JavaScript file. I'll call it tax calculator.js. Okay, so
we can use Visual Code for the studio.
Yep, absolutely. Visual Studio Code. In this case, we'll use the HTTP module. Well, let's see. Do we want to link to it, or do we want to do it in here? So we can either do this as a completely separate page, or we could do the tax calculator just as another function here and map the URL in here. I don't know which makes more sense to you.
Map it.
So we'll just do it in here. We'll just do it in our server.js. Okay. So we're going to add a link. Actually, no, we don't. We'll add a variable called calculate tax. So we're going to need to pass in to this page as part of the query string. We're going to pass in a value, and then we're going to calculate tax on it. To do this, we're going to need to link to one of the other built-in modules. So I'll put in a comment up here, link to the URL module. So we don't have to install this as part of NPM. It comes with Node. As soon as you install Node, just like it installed the HTTP module, it installed the file system object module, it also installs one called URL. So we'll just use the require function.
So, wait, but detail.
Whoops, and I'm missing here, I need an equal sign. May as well get my syntax correct. So we will get the subtotal from the query URL's query string. So I'll create a variable called QS, which stands for query string. Actually, sorry, it's request.url. So this gives us, hang on, just bear with me for a second. I want to make sure I'm doing it right. We're going to take our URL and call the parse method. So we'll pass in the URL. This code here, I'll translate it into English in a minute. This gives us, in effect, the query string. So anything that happens after the question mark in the URL. Okay. So request.url, that's the base URL. And by calling the parse method, it allows us to identify any parameters on the end of that URL. So we're just going to store that as a variable. So this URL library, in order to be able to call this URL parse function, this is why we've got a link to it. That function lives inside of this module. So we're going to link to the module, and then we're going to call a function that lives inside of that module. So we'll get the subtotal from the query string. So I'll create a variable in camel case.
So we're pretty much doing the whole lab in class then?
Nope, this isn't the lab.
Oh.
This is just a demo for us to do together, but you'll be able to use some of this code when you do the lab.
Okay. And you'll be posting this code online also?
Yeah, I'll put it on GitHub. So this should give us the value. So if the URL is localhost / calculate tax / subtotal equals 100, our subtotal variable will be equal to 100 at this point. So now we want to calculate the tax. So I'll create a variable called tax. How would we calculate it?
Not with that.
The subtotal equals subtotal plus subtotal times 0.13.
Okay, well that's the formula. So it's subtotal times 0.13. That'll give us the amount of the tax. Now, our variables in Node, they're not typed. So it has no data type. If we want to perform math with this, we better convert it to a numeric format. So we're going to use the parse float because it could have a decimal. So that will make sure we're dealing with a numeric value. So we'll create a variable called total. And how would we get the value for total? Yep, so but again, subtotal is still untyped. So we've got two options. We can either parse float again, or we could add parse float right here. Either one, I'll do it again. So can make sure it's a floating point number. So this should give us the tax. Now we want to send back to the browser both the tax amount and the subtotal amount. Display results. So I'll use response.write.
May I have your attention, please? In a few minutes, the fire alarm system will be activated for the following buildings: H, D, and E buildings. Please act as if this is a real emergency. You are required to evacuate the building. Thank you.
So we'll display the tax. We'll display the total. We could send a header, a 200 response code. We can leave that out for now. It's probably a good idea to put it in. But for now, we just want to see if this function works. So what it's going to check for is any parameter called subtotal in the URL. Grab that value and store it in a variable called subtotal. Then it will do our calculations and display our results. So what I want to do is go to my browser and try this out. NodeMon should have restarted because I saved all my as I went along, which is good. It is. So here's how I'm going to try to run it. Localhost. What do we call it? Oh, it's in server.js. So I'm going to go to tax. So I get cannot get. And actually I want to be able to run it like this. Why am I getting cannot get? Give you a hint. There's actually nothing wrong with our code, I don't think. We haven't handled that URL. We haven't told the application what to do if it gets a request at /tax calculator. Right now, it only knows what to do for requests at hello and goodbye. So now we'll handle requests here, and if we get a request at /tax calculator, we will call our calculate tax function. So we are setting up the URL mapping. We're telling the application this is what to do if that URL gets a request. Call our calculate function. So now, NodeMon has restarted yet again for me. So I've just added line 50. Okay, something's not happy, but I don't have an error.
Yeah, it'll load through, it just takes time.
Unless I've done something wrong, which is a possibility. Won't be the first time. Let me stop and restart because it shouldn't take that long. Yes. I'm going to restart. I'm going to make sure my hello still works. Yeah, there's my JSON. My goodbye. Maybe we should try writing our header in here. Not sure if that's what it needs. Can't hurt.
Are you writing that inside the tax calculator?
Yep. Just like we did here. We wrote it inside of our hello and goodbye world. Doesn't really matter whether I put it first or after the calculations. Restart it and see if that helps. If not, I'm going to move it out of this into its own file and try it. Still something here is not happy with, because that response not completing.
Oh, mine loaded through. Just takes.
I'll try loading it with no parameters. Did anybody else's load or just Brandon's?
The value 30, in fact, 32 points.
Oh, I know what's missing. All our code here is right. We're missing something.
See?
We never ended the response. I didn't mean to teach you that, but now I've just shown you what happens if you send a response but never call response.end. It never, the response never actually comes to the browser because it's staying open thinking there's more coming. There. Now it loads. So if we try different values, there's my tax, and there's my total. Now we could try putting HTML tags in here as well. Might be a good idea. Let's see how they will render. I'll just put on a line break and save, and we'll see whether that HTML tag will split these into different lines. No, it's because it's a JavaScript file. Normally we don't write the HTML in here. I can actually probably do it this way. Instead, if I put in a new line, it should recognize that because it's JavaScript. We'll try it this way instead. Yeah, that works because it's JavaScript and not HTML. So that's just, that was in our slide from last week. That /n will give us a new line when we're writing JavaScript. I suppose I could also put the total in here as well. The subtotal, sorry. Probably makes sense to show that first. I don't know what would happen if I could use text HTML here and use HTML tags. I'm not sure if it would render HTML in that case. I doubt it. So there's the completed file. What would happen if I do this? I don't put in a numeric value for subtotal. What would you expect will happen?
Give it 1 to 3
Right. We get not a number. So it shows the subtotal as I've typed it, but as soon as it tries to calculate, do my calculation, as soon as it tries to call parse float, it doesn't work because there's no way to convert ABC into a floating point number. but it should work this way. So this is our code for grabbing parameters from the URL. We need to make sure we include our URL library and we parse the URL.query. And then we could access individual values out of that query string. So actually, here's what I'm going to have you do, I think. I will give you your lab. You have until tomorrow night. I'm going to show you the lab. It's similar to this. Okay? And then we've got one other exercise you can work on for practice that's not for marks. So here's the lab. So for your lab, you're going to build a simple calculator. Oh, should be a text file. I left off the extension by accident. So what I want you to do for this, I want you to actually, sorry, this says lab 2, it should say lab 3. I want you to make a new node application. So don't use the lesson 2 files, you use them as reference, but don't just copy and paste it, okay? So make a lab 3 node application. I want you to initialize npm in there. I'll change this so it says lab 3. And you're making a calculator, so similar to the one we just did, except instead of the parameter just being subtotal, your lab will take 3 parameters. The first parameter is called method. And there are 4 possible values: add, subtract, multiply, or divide. Then there's an x parameter, and then there's a y parameter. So I'll try I'll try 4 different URLs. I want to run your application. Again, all of these I'll change to say lab 3. So if I type in lab 3, I actually don't need the .js. If I just type in lab 3 this way. If I put in method equals add, x is 16 and y is 4, this is what your page should display. Should display the value of x, should display a plus sign, display a value of y, an equal sign, and the total. Okay? So and this is exactly how I'm going to test it. I'm going to try these 4 URLs, except they'll all just say lab 3 this way. So when I try any of those URLs and put in those values, this should be the output that I get. So I can pass in any 2 integers. One is x, one is y, and I pass in one of the 4 methods: add, subtract, multiply, or divide. I want you to use npm. You'll need npm if you're going to use the connect module. You'll have to install connect through npm, and I want you to install nodemon. Well, you've already probably installed nodemon globally, so you're already there. And you can initialize it. If you do the npm init, it will build the package.json file for you. And you'll just want to add this line of code to start your server. Okay. So I'll just update the document a little bit. It's a little out of date. And I want you to save it on GitHub. Call it COMP2106 Lab 3. So all you need to do to submit is give me your link to your GitHub repository. And I'll just download the code locally, and I'll try and run your little node application locally. I can probably show you a result just to show you in real time what I'm looking for. Let's see. Maybe I have an example, maybe I don't. No, I don't, sorry. Unless I have it here. Okay. So I'll just change this, a few of these instructions. Okay, so it's basically just a chance for you to practice on your own what we did. Okay, are there any questions? Should say a node application. 3. .js.
Just looking at some things right now. So when we pass something through the get, it retrieves it as a as JSON. Is that what I'm looking at here? So it's like if I print our query string, it looks like JSON. Well, JSON data set.
Well, all of the data in Node automatically is any data is automatically written in JSON format.
Okay.
Node handles everything that way.